All right, folks, well, it's our last day here in Washington, and it's really chilly. So we dressed up warmly. We have about 5 hours to go, and we're gonna go see at least a portion of the things that we originally were planning. But unfortunately, as things goes, it was inauguration. You know, there's lineups, there's security. You can't go into many places. You end up spending too much time waiting in line. And so we barely really saw anything of Washington, including the White House and George Washington Monument. So we're gonna try to catch up today and do a short walk. And I'll show you some of the monuments along the way. So let's go.
This is Major General James S. McPherson. It says the Grand Army of Tennessee, Atlanta, July 1864. Now I'm pretty sure that's when Atlanta was burned down by the Union Army.
Oh,
I believe
under General Sherman. So this guy probably served with General Sherman, if I had to guess. I'm not 100% sure, but
obviously a Union soldier, right?
of course, not a Confederate.
No, they would never have that here. Yeah, okay. Very interesting. Well, there you go. There is the monument to Major General James B. McPherson. Very cool. And it's just a 5-minute walk from the White House. Look at this beautiful, beautiful monument, stoically standing against the gray skies of Washington, D.C. All right, let's keep on walking. The White House is somewhere there in the distance. Well, we won't have the time today, but just on the side of the street here, there's an interesting museum for you. Victims of Communism Museum. So I'd actually love to go there, being from the former Soviet Union countries, and check it out. But unfortunately, we just don't have the time today, but it's there for you to visit. All right, so as we were walking to the White House, we stumbled upon another monument. This is for Tadeusz Kosciuszko, who is a Polish national. He fought in some wars in Europe, actually against Russia and Prussia, and then eventually, I guess, somehow ended up in the United States and fought for the Americans against the British in the Great American Revolution, and is considered to be a hero of Poland, Belarus, and Lithuania, and I assume a hero of the United States. So look at this. The son of Poland, General Tadeusz Kosciuszko. That's a beautiful monument, really. Let's see. And on the back here, it has, of course, the American eagle taming or killing a snake. I wonder if he's buried here. And on the back it says, "And freedom shrieked as Kosciuszko fell." Look how unique these statues are. That is very cool. Look at this. You see a sort of a farmer with a sickle. Look at this. Military engineer in the American Revolution, fortified Saratoga and West Point. So he was an engineer that came here to help the Americans gain their freedom from the United Kingdom. All right. Well, let's keep on walking. We're getting ever closer to the White House. Well, here's another monument. Unfortunately, it's behind these barricades. You know, everything is secured off for the inauguration reasons. But again, clearly some kind of American Revolution monument based on the attire of the gentlemen. Right there, you see. See? There you are. Oh, there we go.
This is the monument to Lafayette, who was a great French general who came over with much needed troops and ships to help the American Revolution. He's probably the greatest non-American hero of the American Revolution. He later would go on to be a major figure in the French Revolution. He was the leader of the moderate faction. He opposed the radicals and the Jacobins. I believe later he was either a marshal, one of the men trying to sort of restore the monarchy later, and oppose first the Revolutionary Council and later Napoleon. In fact, in World War II propaganda posters that the Americans used when they were going onto D-Day, they said, "Lafayette, we are coming." So this statue is a powerful symbol of American-French sort of friendship and relations going back all the way to the founding of the United States.
Is he the guy in The Patriot that hangs out with the main protagonist?
No, but that is that
Prototype.
guy is supposed to be a representative of the French contribution.
Yeah,
Yes.
so it would be like that kind of thing.
Yes. Yeah.
Cool. All right.
Vive la liberté.
All right, guys. Well, it's kind of hard to see from here because it's all fenced out. But behind there is the famous White House. Of course, it was famously started. The construction was famously started by George Washington, the first president of the United States, in 1798, I believe. But he actually never lived in it. It was still being constructed while he was alive, and then he passed away, and the first president to move here was his wife, was John Adams. And then for next 250 years almost now, the presidents of the United States have taken up their residency there, and upon their election move in with their family, and you know, can live there and work there at the same time. It was burned once by the Canadians. Well, not Canadians. It was burned once by the UK forces in 1812, and then also it had another major fire in the 20th century. But it still stands here in all its grandeur. I'm not sure if you can see it. There's a lineup of people trying to get a little bit of a look at it, but yeah, there you go. There's the White House right behind that fence. And as each president moves in, he can make his personal choice how he wants to furnish the Oval House and other rooms. And so it basically gets redecorated every 4 years with each new administration. But at least I can kind of give you a little glimpse of the walls right there. So there you go, the American icon. Tell us, what is this building here?
Well, this is the Treasury Department building, and that's Albert Gallatin, who was Secretary of the Treasury, I guess, in the early American period. Apparently, he was signed the Treaty of Ghent. He was a minister to France and Great Britain.
Oh, wow.
I don't know too much about him, but obviously he was very... I thought they would have like Hamilton there, but he was very big with the First Bank of the U and all that.
Very interesting.
But still,
I think Gallatin was close to Hamilton. I'm not an expert on the founding fathers by any degree or.
All right, so
American
Treasury, that's where the monies are.
It's right next to the White House.
Of course. If you're in a pickle, you gotta get more cash. So, guys, finally we made it to what is arguably the most famous monument of them all in the United States. What you see behind me is a 555 feet high monument dedicated to George Washington, the United States' first president. It is, believe it or not, but it is higher than the pyramids of Giza, and it was the highest building, highest man-made structure in the world from the years 1884 to 1889, and then it got surpassed by the Tower of Eiffel. And so so this is a gigantic thing. As you can see, there's a difference of color there, and this is of course because the construction started before the Civil War, and they were able to build up to this point where the color changes, and then the Civil War broke out, the funds ran out, the priorities were different, and so they stopped it and didn't build it for something like 20-30 years, and then they continued to build it, but after the war was over. But by that time, that site from which the granite was surfaced was no longer in operation, so they had to get it from a different location, and that location had a different hue of marble, and so that's why this part is kind of yellow and this part is white. I guess this one kind of aged better because it still has that bright white hue to it. And so actually we can go up next to it and then walk in the doors and supposedly take the elevator all the way up to the very top where you can see little windows. And so that's maybe something that we'll try to do. We'll see if we need to sign up or not, but if we can just walk in and get tickets, that's what we're gonna do. But look at that, straight in the middle of Washington, D.C. stands this colossal awful monument dedicated to America's maybe greatest man. It looks kind of deceitful because, you know, maybe because it's an obelisk and it's very thin and tall, it doesn't look that high. But like I said, this thing is taller than the pyramids of Giza, right? Which, you know, whenever you look into photos, you just think they're just humongous. So this surpasses that. Just imagine the amount of work that went into this. It is hollow inside, but stacking all these, you know, slabs of marble would just be such a tedious job. It took decades. And by the way, this is not, of course, where Washington is buried. He is buried in Mount Vernon, just about hours south of DC, Washington, in his family estate, where he had his primary house. But this is the place to remember him for most of Americans.
That is the same type the president uses the business height.
Look at this, and right by the Washington Memorial right now, we can see the presidential helicopter going by. I'm not sure if the president's in it or not, but
yes, so when the president is on board the helicopter, it is the call sign is Marine One.
oh, okay.
But that's only when the president is aboard.
Ah. All right.
Is that the Pentagon? No.
Look at this. Look how beautiful it looks up close. You know, the closer you get, the more you realize just how massive this thing is. It just sort of cuts into the sky unapologetically like that. Look at that. Wow. Beautiful. One of humans' greatest creations in engineering. One of the tallest things ever made for its time. Okay. Let's go see. Let's go see if we can get inside. Wow. So we just asked the security and they said that you can get in to the monument, but what you have to do is you have to come to that house right there, right by the monument at 8:45 in the morning, where they give out the free tickets. And they only have a limited amount of them. And if they're out like they are now, there's no way you can get in. Or you can reserve online, I think, and that would work as well. But we did neither because we were so preoccupied with the inauguration this weekend. So unfortunately, there's no luck for us to go inside here, but perhaps we'll be back sometime in a few years and I'll show you guys what it is like inside. But before we leave, you know, you can still walk up to the monument and touch this 200-year-old monument that is, you know, the heartland really of United States. You can rightfully say that it is because it's smack in the center of the National Mall, which is the mall that unites the United States Capitol with the White House, with the Lincoln Memorial, Jefferson Memorial, and all the other national memorials here in the capital of the United States. And so now we're touching these cold marble walls. How amazing is that? Look at that. Touching history itself. Fantastic. And as you can see there in the distance, this is where you have the famous pool, and then behind it is again world famous Lincoln Memorial, where a gigantic statue of Abraham Lincoln sits on a chair welcoming its visitors. So we're gonna make our slow progress towards there. It probably should be around 15-minute walk, so let's go. You know, as we walk this historical mall, this park in the middle of Washington DC, you know, it just puts goosebumps on you because, you know, you're walking in the heartland of probably one of the world's most powerful countries to ever exist in world's history, right? The country that gave us so many achievements and brought so many people out of poverty and fought in so many wars. I mean, the financial success that it enjoys throughout centuries is unparalleled. So I think actually now, as we were making our way towards the Lincoln Memorial, we're gonna pass through the World War II Memorial, which is actually a more recent one. I think it was done sometime in, I think it was actually finished in 2004, if I'm correct. But I think that's what it was. But it's a very interesting one, very kind of military bravado one, smack in the center, right beside the Washington Monument, like right in the middle of Washington Monument and Lincoln Memorial. So let's go. Okay, so here you guys are. Look, this is where we were. We took our short walk, and now we're gonna cross the road and get to the World War II Memorial. Look how epic it looks. This circumference of columns. I think each of the columns, I think, represents a state or a territory in the United States, signifying the sacrifices that each of the states had in the battle for freedom during World War II. So let's walk up closer and see what we can find. Here we can see the flag is half-mast, and I'm assuming it might actually be constantly half-mast for remembrance of the fallen soldiers. It says, Americans came to liberate, not to conquer, to restore freedom, and to end tyranny. Oh, that's it. And to end tyranny. So that is the message that they want to leave about the American involvement in World War II. All right, well, look at this. So now, as you can see, this is a fountain right there. Of course, it is winter time, so you can't really see this monument in its full beauty, but this non-stopping stream of water would be flowing here during summer, spring, autumn, and I'm sure it would give it an extra brilliance. But right now, we're walking in the cold, damp weather of this winter, but that's all right. So there you go, look at this. Each of the columns has the name. Ah, you know what? Okay, Virgin Island, Philippines, Puerto Rico, Alaska. I don't know why there's Philippines here. I'll have to ask my friends, because it's not American Philippines, but maybe it was under American administration during World War II. I'm not sure. But yeah, here you see we start with all of the state names, and there's a wreath hung for each of the states, remembering the young men that fell in that brutal bloodbath of a conflict in the 1940s, when the Nazis clashed with communism and allies as well. So look at that. Nevada, Kansas, Minnesota, Wisconsin. And so it goes, and so it goes for all the other 50 states. Let's see. Oh, well, look at this. And on the other side, we can actually see a life wreath being laid under each of the columns. Oh, so beautiful. Such a touching touch. And then on the walls, I can already see some of the quotes. So I wonder what they say. So look at this. Here it says, they have given their sons to military services. They have stoked the furnaces and hurried the factory wheels. They have made their planes and welded the tanks, riveted the ships and rolled the shells. President Franklin D. Roosevelt. So here's, of course, he's talking about all the people that stayed behind, the parents, the sisters, the young children that all helped out in the war. And here, of course, you can see this side has a major column right there, and it says Atlantic. So this would be your, Normandy landings and the Western Front. So this primarily dealt with the Nazi Germany fight. And on the other side, You can see there the colon for the Pacific, which of course would be the wars with the Imperial Japan. So different sides of the war. America was fighting on two fronts, both in Atlantic and Pacific. Look at that. World War II would end up being the second deadliest conflict in American history. Only, you know, the only conflict that would take more lives would of course be the American Civil War, which would take more than 600,000 Americans. I believe it was about 300,000 Americans that died in World War II. Oh, and look at this. This is beautiful too. On the sides, there's these plaques, kind of signifying the different chapters of the war. Oh, this is interesting. Look at that. This is the meeting on the River Elbe. This is the American troops meeting the Soviet troops as they joined the two fronts, inching closer and closer towards each other from the Eastern and Western fronts. And this was their first historical meeting, which there's multiple videos and photos of, so you can look it up. But look at this. This is commemorated here, the unity between America and Soviet Union at the time in the fight to defeat the Nazi Germany. And like so, there's other common day kind of pictograms of common day scenes from the battles. Soldiers, infantry soldiers walking with the tanks. Here, of course, is the Normandy beach landing. Something you can beautifully see. I mean, it's a terrible thing, but it was beautifully filmed in the movie Saving Private Ryan. So that's something you can see there more in depth, this kind of scene. Here's the paratroopers jumping off from the plane, perhaps going deep inside the enemy lines, trying to disturb the rear of the enemy as the main forces attack from the front. Very dangerous job. Of course, the pilots, you know, the pilots had one of the highest casualties in World War II, and so these were heroic men. The men of the fleet shooting down the planes as they try to bomb the American destroyers and carriers, and you know, the crews that would service the planes, that would knock out German centers and factories. Oh, and here's the beautiful plaque to the women at the front, who are always also a very large part in making sure that the Germany was defeated in the end. And not sure about this. Civilians, it looks, but oh, perhaps this is a parade. Let's see. What does it say? Buy war bonds. Oh, this is all of the drives for people to buy war bonds, which would, you know, fund the army and the economy at the time of the peril. So that's what that's for. And one more here. Oh, Germany declares war, it says. So this is the very beginning. This is how, you know, men found themselves when they heard of the news. You know, perhaps they would be sitting at the workplace on a pile of boxes, and this man is pondering, what will he do? Will he conscript or not? And obviously, you know, later making a decision to do so. So very cool. All right, let's keep on walking. All right, now we came to the Pacific hemisphere of the monument. So let's see what kind of plaques we have here. Well, sort of the same things. You see soldiers, looks like leaving for war, getting inspected before they go into the battle. You know, loading the shells. Oh, no, this is loading a rotor onto the ship. Working on the farms. what is this, loading torpedoes inside a submarine. Oh, maintaining the aircrafts at the takeoff. Here's a dramatic one. Obviously, you know this is a Pacific because there's palm trees in the background, and here's the soldiers unloading on the beach, and the unfortunate first one, perhaps the bravest of them all, lays slain as his brothers kind of rush over his body onwards towards the fight. Here's them fighting in the jungles. You know, some captains on the radios perhaps calling for backup or air support. And here's, of course, the sorrowful moment of mourning their dead comrades right there. As you see, as they lay the helmet on the covered body right there, and all the other graves, yet unmarked, but are just marked off with a rifle sticking out of the dirt with a helmet on it, and the priest reading a prayer. And then here, of course, another terrible scene is, of course, the POWs as they get released. You can see how different they look to the well-nourished soldiers of the American Army. These folks are sort of skull and bones, starved by the harsh treatment of the Japanese in these camps, which were notorious for you know, basically working them to death without giving them much food. You know, the sooner they died, the better, sort of was the opinion. And then eventually, victoriously coming home, meeting their loved ones, their wives, embracing in a kiss, like there, probably at the first sight of each other, meeting their kids that they haven't seen for many years, parents, there's a father, maybe a brother, maybe dancing with a mother right there, who knows, but a joyous moment as the war came to the close at the Pacific Arena. And on this side it has another quote from Chester Nimitz, and it says, "They fought together as brothers in arms. They died together, and now they sleep side by side. To them we have a solemn obligation." What a wise words. Okay, let's keep on walking. You know, this monument has some beautiful, beautiful, beautiful quotes. Oh, look at this. Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory. Beautiful. Again, another quote by Franklin D. Roosevelt. Okay, well, there you go. There's the famous quotes of, oh, no quotes, sorry. The famous landmark battles of the Pacific Arena. Here's the Battle of Midway, one of the turning points in the war. And here's a quote from Walter Lord Athor. I can't see the name correctly, but it says, "Battle of Midway, June 4 to 7, 1942. They had no right to win, yet they did. And in doing so, they changed the course of war. Even against the greatest of odds, there's something in the human spirit, a magic blend of skill, faith, and valor that can lift man from certain defeat to incredible victory." Wow, look at that. And there's another beautiful one here. The war's end. So this was said at the war's end in the Pacific. And it says, this is another, oh, sorry, gee, both of those quotes by General Douglas MacArthur. And so this one says, "Today the guns are silent. A great tragedy has ended. A great victory has been won. The skies no longer rain death. The sea bear only commerce. Men everywhere walk upright in the sunlight. The entire world is quietly at peace." Beautiful. All right, so here's the last quote that we have here for the Pacific side of the battle. And this is Harry Truman, President of the United States. "Our debt to to the heroic men and valiant women in the service of our country can never be repaid. They have earned our undying gratitude. America will never forget their sacrifice. All right, and here's a very, very moving, installation. So what you see here is the famous wall of golden stars. So at first you might not give it any significance. You might walk by, but once you read about it, what that represents, it will stop you in your footsteps, because literally each star that you see here represents about 100 military men that sacrificed their life in the Battle of World War II. And there's 4,048 stars here representing, the 400,000, more than 400,000 soldiers that fell in the battle. So this is a memorial for all of them. Just, already the stars look innumerable, too much to count. But when you realize that each one represents 100 men that never returned home, this just represents the magnitude of the tragedy that World War II was for the United States. You just imagine how many families, loved ones, kids, parents, brothers, sisters were affected by the passing of these heroes, right? It just the impact was just so painful that no wonder the world does not want the World War III to ever happen, because this was the price that was paid in the last war. So it's truly too large to size, too large to count. Just wow, just look at this. So many people. And here it says, here we mark the price of freedom. Wow. So this is the price of freedom. 500,000 people almost dead, cut down at the prime of their lives. Just to finish this memorial, I just wanted to also film these quotations here. Here we have another one by President Harry Truman. The heroism of our own troops was matched by that of the armed forces of the nations that fought by our side. They absorbed the blows and they shared to the full in the ultimate destruction of the enemy. And honestly, those words ring true. So many other nations sacrificed so much for that victory. Not only the Western European nations like France and Britain and all the other ones, but one of the biggest contributions to war, well, I would say the biggest contribution to war actually, was of course the struggle that Soviet Union at the time had. More than 30 million people died in Soviet Union as a result of World War II. This would be not just soldiers, but also civilians that got executed, wounded, and as a result, the casualties on the Eastern Front was 30 million people. Just imagine that number. It's mind-boggling just to think what that would do to a nation. But they persevered, and today they're flourishing nations like Russia and Ukraine and Belarus and all these post-Soviet Union countries. But what Truman said should not be forgotten. The sacrifices that all the other partners of the war, all the other allies of the war, also put to make sure it ends. All right, so there you go. There you go. We're done. We now walked around this magnificent monument, all around it. Looked at the quotes and the images and the wreath and the columns. What a beautiful, beautiful place. And especially with the backdrop of the Washington Monument on one side, the Lincoln Memorial down the park that way. All right, well, that was amazing. And now we're walking towards the Lincoln Memorial right there in the end. And as we do, we'll walk by the reflection pool. And as far from what I read, it doesn't really have a specific meaning to it. But of course, you know, reflection. You look upon it and you reflect upon things. You know, people don't just go in there and wash themselves or whatever. No, it's always is left sort of uninhibited. It's only a knee deep or something like that. Right now it's covered in snow, so you can't really see much. But in springtime, summer, autumn, it just makes the whole place look beautiful with the surrounding monuments and trees and the sky reflecting from it. And of course, now in the distance there, you can see the Lincoln Memorial, one of the, again, postcard monuments that you can find here in Washington, D.C., dedicated to President Abraham Lincoln, the famous president under which the Civil War in America started, the war that took more lives of Americans than any other war. And it was a internal war. So it wasn't even, you know, the enemies dying. The enemies were the same, the people from the same nation, right? The Confederacy states versus the Union states. And so it's a very tragic chapter in a life, in the history of the United States, because you basically had brother fighting against brother, son against the father. It was a sad, brutal, and grim war that took 5 years to slug out. As a result, of course, the Confederate States suffered a defeat, most notably first at the Gettysburg, which is not that far away, maybe about 2-hour drive from here. But even then, the Confederate Army never had the resources, really, from what I understand, to wage a long war. So their strategy was to push, and to see if they could take the capital of the Union, which they never did. And then the army became stranded and out of resources and impoverished and well-fed. Eventually, the general of the Confederate Army, Robert E. Lee, surrendered to Ulysses Grant, the general of the Union Army, and that marked the end of that war. Some say the war that never ended. There's still cultural divisions between the southern and northern states in the United States that still persist till this day, but you know, that war definitely left a lot of scars, that is for sure. And so the president that sort of was in charge of the United States at the time was, of course, Abraham Lincoln. He was the one that decided to not let the rebellious states leave the Union, but rather start a war to deal with the rebels. And so he was successful in that. They did stop it, but at a great cost. And then later on, he was shot by Wilkes Booth, not far away from here in the Ford's Theater. He was shot in the back of the head and then died shortly after. But the Americans never forgot the importance of their president and constructed this beautiful monument in the beginning of the 20th century. So there you go. The monument to the president that sort of brought the Civil War to its beginning and to its end. So there you go. We're walking up close now, and you'll see a lot of military. Of course, this is all the soldiers that were called to help guard the nation's capital during the 60th inauguration of Donald J. Trump that just happened yesterday. And so now that they're off duty and they can enjoy a few days of vacation, they're taking up this opportunity, and of course they're going around and seeing all the sights as they are, you know, these soldiers are from all the different states in America, and they might have never been here before. So now they're enjoying the time that is so well deserved. Look at that. Yeah. Tons and tons of military just enjoying the capital of their great nation. All right, so let's start moving our way along the steps here towards the Lincoln Memorial. There's no tickets needed for this. It's an open space. And the statue that you'll see inside, there's no guards or anything. You just kind of walk up to it. But look at that. And it always amazes you just how Roman this looks, or Greek. All of this architecture looks with its columns on the around the perimeter of the wall. Wow. And there you can see the states. The states, but it looks like, yeah. All of the states together. So this sort of represents the new union that Abraham Lincoln brought into being by ending the Civil War. You know, you have Connecticut and Texas. You have California, West Virginia, North Dakota, Arkansas, Pennsylvania, and Georgia. So obviously states that were on a different side of the Civil War, that were once at each other's throats, killing each other mercilessly. But now, with the war over, the Union reestablished, this monument celebrates that very reestablishment. And so it's kind of a unifying message for the generations to come that this monument symbolizes. Wow, look at that. And there's the great opening right there, and you can already kind of get a glimpse on the statue that lurks behind these great columns. Wow. I wanted to come here my entire life. I've seen so many photos and videos of this place. Even in the movies it gets featured, you know. For example, if you ever watched Forrest Gump, this building was on the backdrop, and the reason being, you know, this venue is perfect for public gatherings. So for example, when Martin Luther King Jr. was doing his famous "I Have a Dream" speech, he done it from the steps along the way to the monument. And I think where he stood, his name's actually engraved in the floor, so we can see that. But you can just imagine this whole place being just completely covered with, you know, hundreds of thousands of people that would be listening to the speech coming from here. And so historically, traditionally, this has become a place where a lot of civil rights things get talked about, get amplified into the masses. And also, of course, all of this would be covered with people during the inauguration. As we walked from the Washington Monument right there, all of this area would be full of people standing outside, listening through the speakers and looking through the screens as the president as a new president of the United States takes the oath from the steps of the state capitol building, which lies in the very end of this long park, just far behind the monument to Washington. And on the very back of it, of this park, is where Lincoln Memorial stands. So this is the end of it, and the National Capitol is the beginning, and the Washington Monument is smack in the center. So that's how the National Mall is constructed. All right, well, without further ado, shall we go in? Oh, look at this. We found the boys. We found the guys. Epics. Looks like they beat us to it. Adam, how was it?
Good.
Yeah. Epic?
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
It's quite impressive, actually.
It's literally like...
It's like, Nicholas, it's about the same size as the Parthenon. We were saying like it's like a tomb to a Roman emperor, honestly.
Yeah,
Oh.
it's like a shrine. This is basically how you'd honor a Roman emperor.
Yeah.
Yeah, like this is a secular shrine.
The Romans could see this today, they would be like, "Good job."
Good job.
Yes.
Like unironic.
You upheld our
Emperor
memory.
Lincoln.
Emperor Lincoln, yeah. All right. All right, so the boys clearly liked the visit. Let's see if we do. Wow. Look at that. There it is. The famous Lincoln statue. Oh my goodness. What a beautiful sight. Wow. Such a big statue, and look at the setting of this monument with these columns inside. Oh gosh, this takes your breath away. And his stoic look at that. You know, that sort of tells you, don't joke around with me. You know, stern, determined gaze. And it's always faced towards the national capital right there in the end, as if a reminder to the future generation that old Abe is still watching over it. All right, and you know what's interesting? One of the interesting things about this monument is look at the hands of the president. Supposedly, the sculptor of this statue had a deaf son, and so the hand gesture on the left and right arms of the president, as you look at it, literally says AL, which is of course the initials for Abraham Lincoln. That actually is the sign language for those two letters. So how cool is that? There's a little hidden message in there. Wow. And then of course above that, there's a dedication words right there. So it says, "In this temple, as in the heart of the people for whom he saved the Union, the memory of Abraham Lincoln is enshrined forever." So there you go. In the hearts and minds of Americans, he is the savior of the Union that was able to end the Civil War. And then on this wall is of course some of Lincoln's famous speeches. I believe either this one or the one on the other wall, as you can see, was given to the soldiers at the Battle of Gettysburg. So this is actually the excerpt of his presidential inauguration speech, I believe, that he said at his second term. All right, guys, so there you go. This is the words that he spoke at his second inauguration. It's a little bit too lengthy to read here. We don't have that much time, but you know, here's the video. You can pause and read through these eternal messages that are left upon these walls. Those are beautiful paintings or mosaic right there on the top. Look at that. Sort of the angel with two wings spread over people, perhaps people of America. I'm not sure. Okay, let's go and look. Let's go and look at the other side of the monument. Okay, I think this one is the speech that he gave at Gettysburg Battle to the soldiers that were about to go in the battle. And this says, "For 67 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of the war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live." Well, what a monument, guys. Look at this. The old Abe sitting so elegantly yet stoically overlooking the National Mall and its capital. Oh, look at this. There's something about to happen here. Let's listen on this. against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
that I will bear true faith
and allegiance to the same,
and allegiance to the same,
that I will obey the orders of the President of the United States,
that I will obey the orders of the President of the United States,
the Governor of Tennessee,
the Governor of Tennessee,
and the officers appointed over me.
and the officers appointed over me.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Wow, well look at that. We just experienced an oath ceremony that the soldiers are giving to their nation at the footsteps of Abraham Lincoln. How cool is that? I didn't even know this takes place here. That was just an amazing thing to witness. What a patriotic act right here. Wow, gives you goosebumps. Just fantastic. There's, look at them. They go one after another. There's scores of them doing this. Wow, let's see if we can actually look at the back of the monument. You know, some people say that supposedly the back of Lincoln's head resembles a face. Some even say that it is a face of Robert E. Lee, the defeated general of the Confederate forces, kind of looking away from the Capitol. And I'm not sure how true that is, but there's another pledge just been given. But I'm not sure how true that is, but you know, I can kind of maybe see an outlay of the face. So who knows? But a little tidbit of history for you right there. Well, I believe it is time for us to depart. We can now proudly say we've been to Lincoln Memorial, one of the most famous memorials in the world. I've seen it from all the other sites and the inscriptions on its walls and its roof and its columns. And as we walk out, look at this beautiful view of the National Mall that you get with the Washington Memorial right there and the Capitol to the end of there. And then somewhere in the trees hidden to the side is... All right, and the last stop we're gonna make on this walk through the National Mall is of course gonna be the Vietnam Memorial, which is, you know, it was one of the earliest memorials for wars here. It was built in 1984 or 1982, I believe. You know, the World War II is only 20 years old. World War I is about the same. The Korean one, I think, is older. No, I think is younger than this one as well. So this is one of the oldest ones here. And when it was first built, people were like, I don't know about this. You know, it's kind of minimalistic and it doesn't have the bravado that, let's say, the World War II memorial that we just saw. But then, as time went by, it became a very iconic place. And I'll show you why. And now that I see it in front of me, I can really see why this is one of the most memorable memorials you can visit in Washington, D.C. So let's go up. So there you go. As you can see, the flag is again at the half-mast, symbolizing mourning. Adam, do you know how many people died in Vietnam?
I think
58,000 Americans.
58,000 Americans.
Okay,
Yeah.
so 50,000 Americans.
58,000 Americans, and I think
And
the
like
army...
2 million Vietnamese.
2 million
Okay.
Vietnamese. I would say approximately 300 to 400,000 South Vietnamese soldiers died, I give or take.
Yeah.
And about 1 million North Vietnamese and
Civilian.
and North Vietnamese and Viet Cong were killed,
Yeah.
plus hundreds of thousands of civilians.
Yeah.
That
It
is
was an absolutely
nuts.
brutal war.
Yeah,
there was no
there-
talking around. Although the Korean War was shorter,
Yeah.
and just arguably, I think almost as many people, if not more, died,
Yeah.
and it was a shorter time period.
Jesus.
The
The Australians had a number of troops in Vietnam as well as the South Koreans, and I think they lost a few thousand guys.
The Koreans
or
did
few
lost
hundred
a
guys.
few hundred, but a lot of people forget this. South Korea fought in the Vietnam War. A lot of people do not know this.
South
Right.
Korea and
They fought
Australia.
President
did-
Park Chung-hee was a devout ally of the Americans.
Yes.
And he sent the Fierce Tigers and the White Horse Division to fight. And
Also-
they fought ferociously.
30,000 Canadian volunteers served with the U.S. forces in Vietnam,
Okay.
and I think a few hundred died.
Okay. So Adam, that's nuts for the 50,000 like oh so
60,000.
Sorry, 60,000 Americans. What 3 million Vietnam people died
I
altogether?
would say like 1 to 1.5. The exact casualty figures are disputed.
That is crazy. Like the difference of casualties. That's insane. Okay, well here's the look at this. Here's the monument to the American soldiers. As you can see, there's all different races. There's Caucasians and blacks that fought side by side. Of course, conscripted, right?
It was actually, there was conscription, but a lot of volunteers. This was actually the first war with integrated units.
Oh,
with
really?
a lot of integrated units. Yeah. This was the first major American war where you had a lot of white and black soldiers fighting together in the same regiments.
Interesting.
Yes, before that, most of the regiments were segregated.
Very interesting. So right there in the distance, guys, this is a memorial. As at first you might not even notice, but you see that black line right there. So on this wall, all the names of the soldiers that died in Vietnam War are engraved. And symbolically, as you can see, the monument is actually below the ground line. And that sort of brings kind of a grim, reflective side to it. You know, these soldiers are dead. They're below the ground. They're buried. And so it's like you're walking underground as you start looking at those names. It's like you're going into the world under, you know, the soil, which is soaked with their blood as you remember them. Look at that. So here you go. All the names of tens of thousands of Americans that died in that brutal, just brutal war. And another thing that is so interesting about this memorial is that, you know, in the wall, you can see the reflection of the street. So as you're walking, not only are you sort of simultaneously going underground, not only are you looking at the names and remembering the soldiers, but then all of a sudden you see yourself on that wall. And you can only imagine what kind of impact that would leave on the families, on the comrades, you know, the veterans that would come to honor their fallen brothers. You know, you would stand here perhaps looking at your old friend that you spent so many battling days with, or maybe your childhood friend that both you and him fought in the same war, and he passed away, and you were left to live. Perhaps his name was John J. Sanner, or maybe it was, you know, John T. Walls. You know, whoever it was, as you would come here and lay the flowers like some of the people did down there, you would also see yourself in the reflection, and you would also see the reflection of the national capital. It's almost as if in their sacrifice, in this wall of names, you see the reflection of America that it became today. Sort of what they have sacrificed resulted in what now reflects off of these slabs. But also you would see yourself reflect, and you could almost, you know, it's like you're joined with the people there on the wall. It's like you are, you know, you see your image right by the names of your comrades, and all of this is under the ground level, as the ground starts above where the slabs end. And so of course that is the genius of this monument, is that combination of emotions that this minimalistic yet reflective and solemn structure symbolize. Wow. And it just goes on and on and on. You know, the price of war, the price of conflict. There it is.
Remember how Ho Chi Minh reached out to the Americans right after World War II? He's like, you want to support me in my independence against the
Adam, do you want to tell us a little bit about the war in general? Kind of how to, well, just brief.
pretty complicated. But
Wikipedia notes.
And so, war in Vietnam had been kind of going, really had been sort of bubbling in the late 40s throughout the 50s as independence fighters who called themselves the Viet Minh fought the French Empire. Vietnam at that point was part of the French Empire.
after the war, because during the war it was occupied by Japan, and after the Japanese lost, the Japanese obviously pulled out, and for a very short period there was actually British troops in Vietnam.
American as well.
But at the very beginning, like 1945, 1946. But then after the war ended, the French requested, is like, well, we want our territory back. So the Brits and the Americans and the other allied nations ended up leaving the French, the zone, whatever you want to call it at the time, and they put French troops, and it rejoined the French Union. And then the French reoccupied the country. Now, obviously, this was not popular with the Vietnamese, because the Vietnamese were like, well, what the hell? Like, we just got rid of the Japanese. We want to be independent.
Yeah.
The French were like, no, we're going back in. Yeah. And then, obviously, Ho Chi Minh, who was a nationalist leader, he actually reached out to the Americans initially during the World War II. He was like, can you help me fight the Japanese? And the Americans were like, no, because you're a communist. And then after the war, it kind of continued. And they didn't want to. Then the Ho Chi Minh and the Viet Minh were like, well, we want to be independent, so we're going to be communists and we're going to fight for our independence. And at this time, Americans, in the late 40s period, the Americans didn't care. But then the French reoccupied the country, and obviously America was anti-colonialist. But at this time, like, they just said, okay, fine, you can have your country back.
Yeah, they didn't really support the either the Vietnamese or the French. But once the Vietnam became independent, which I think was in 54
was when they split the country into two.
Yes.
That was when 1954, they split the country to the north
so
and south.
The French pulled out. More French
after they lost at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu.
Yes.
And that was 1954. They suffered a decisive defeat at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. So and they were forced to leave.
Yeah, so in 1954, Vietnam became independent. It was split into a zone controlled by Ho Chi Minh and his communist nationalists in the north, and an area which was still independent but had more French colonial influence in the south, which was a democracy, but not really.
It was called the Republic of Vietnam, but it was incredibly corrupt.
It was run by very corrupt,
nepotistic, corrupt dictatorships,
similar to the Batista regime in Cuba. And what happened is basically the North started sponsoring communist uprisings in the South. So from 1959 onwards, America started sending special forces and military advisors and CIA and small members of troops to Vietnam to help the non-communist South Vietnamese fight the North Vietnamese. Then in 1964, you have something called the Gulf of Tonkin incident, where a U.S. warship, I believe, is fired on by
a torpedo boat.
Yeah, by a North Vietnamese torpedo boat.
There were two incidents. One of them was actually revealed many years later to be completely fake and false. It never happened. The second incident did happen.
Yeah.
What's the first that didn't happen?
Well, another American ship claimed they were fired upon by a different North Vietnamese ship, but it was later discovered that it was totally made up and it was fake.
Yeah. Anyway, but this led to an escalation of starting to send more and more American troops into Vietnam.
Under the Johnson administration.
Yes.
Because when Kennedy was around, he was pretty cautious. He sent some soldiers in, but he didn't want to get super, super deep in. But after Kennedy was assassinated, Johnson was more pro-war and wanted to get more involved. And the Tonkin incident was seen as a convenient excuse to escalate the war to a much larger degree.
When was conscription enacted?
The draft, I think, was, I don't know exactly, but it was sometime after 1965, 66. It was pretty early.
Yes.
What I understand.
So this war divided not only Vietnam, but in America. There was a lot of young people did not want to go overseas to fight what was increasingly viewed as a costly and bloody quagmire overseas. A lot of people were very supportive of the war. They were like, we're fighting communism as a crusade, but many others viewed the war as...
so it was a complicated thing, yeah.
Yes,
it was very controversial.
There was massive protests and
the counterculture movement
with
States. The counterculture movement with hippies, Woodstock, all this protesting. They were seen as, because, it was not a popular war. And this was the advent of television also changed. This was the first televised war. which really changed things because people, all of a sudden, Americans in their house were getting like different perceptions of the war than they would ever get in Korea or World War II. Which everything was censored back then. There was no television. All news media that Americans, the American public got in Korea and World War II was all censored.
Yeah. And they could see not just American dead, but also dead Vietnamese civilians.
Like the My Lai massacre.
Yeah, that was something 1968.
It was 1968. There was a huge, like, Americans massacred like 100.
Basically, an American platoon or unit went rogue and killed a bunch of Vietnamese civilians. They basically just went crazy. Battle stress and stuff drove them, and they ended up just lashing out and killing all these civilians. This atrocity and the constant use of napalm and Agent Orange, which was
a chemical weapon, defoliant,
which was both of which were really doing a number on Vietnamese civilians, convinced many Americans that this war was not just impossible to win, but fundamentally unjust. There's a lot more criticism of the military and the government in this period than really there had been since the U.S. Civil War.
And so what happened then?
Well, because Nixon in 1968 was elected on the policy of Vietnamization, and he said we're going to have peace with honor, and we're going to bring our troops home with in our way. We're going to transfer authority and strength and the main fighting of the war to the Vietnamese military, and then we're going to slowly pull out.
Which is more or less what he did. Yeah, and then in 1973, the Americans have basically fully pulled out. Yeah. There's still some Air Force doing bombing raids on the North Vietnamese and stuff, but that's about it. And 2 years later, in 1975, the North Vietnam fully conquers the South. And
after they launch a series of spring offensives.
Basically, 20 years of war has ended finally with a full communist victory.
Towards the end, the U.S. Congress passed many resolutions saying we're not giving any more aid to Vietnam because of this. 1975, Nixon was impeached, and the Democrats were starting to make serious gains again in the Congress, and they were saying we're not funding the Vietnam War anymore because it's a quagmire. We're not giving any more. So we're not giving any air support. We're not giving any weapons. We're not giving anything else to the South Vietnamese government. And after that happened, they kind of just slowly started to fall apart, and they couldn't fend off the North Vietnamese military on their own.
So the famous Saigon helicopters, that was happening then, right?
April 30th, 1975 was the day in which the U.S. forces withdrew and the regime fell.
Yeah, the last U.S. force, like the U.S. embassy was evacuated. I said, and America technically left the war in 72,
73.
But in 75 is when all remaining U.S. troops are removed because the war's over. The North won.
The North conquered the South.
So was it kind of similar to like what happened in Afghanistan sort of thing?
It wasn't. The collapse of the South Vietnamese government was nowhere near as quick.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. No. Yeah. It held on for 2 further years.
Okay. Was there a lot of prosecution of people that were left there by the North Vietnamese after
absolutely.
The war? There was massive Red Terror.
Re-education camps.
Oh, okay.
Not just re-education, but like killings by the North Vietnamese government of South Vietnam. A lot of Vietnamese refugees fled over to the United States after they were called the Boat People. That was actually one of the first major kind of migrant crises into the United States.
The people that came in the Gran Torino.
Well, those were the Hmong people, which were actually not Vietnamese, but they're like a tribe in Vietnam that was heavily persecuted by the North. And the South too as well.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, there was a lot of the North Vietnam was a very repressive regime.
Yeah,
it's significantly liberalized now, and it's actually an American ally, but which is kind of the greatest.
They're not an ally, but they're lean.
It has been 60 years now.
And also, people forget in 1979, China invaded Vietnam.
Oh.
China invaded Vietnam in 1979 because at that point Vietnam was leaning towards being pro-Soviet, and the Sino-Soviet split was in effect at this time. And Pol Pot in neighboring Cambodia was genociding his people, but they were a Chinese ally. And Vietnam invaded Cambodia to get rid of Pol Pot
which they did.
They did. They invaded Pol Pot because Pol Pot was also conducting raids into Vietnam and just murdering people.
Was too communist for them even.
Well, Pol Pot was like a madman.
Pol Pot was an insane
psychopathic mass murderer, evil dictator. And the Vietnamese communists, which were heavily supported by the Soviet Union, invaded and got rid of Pol Pot. China didn't like this. They were like, well, fuck you. And then they invaded Vietnam. But they really did not get very far. They only got in, I think, maybe a few dozen kilometers in, and then they were pushed back by
China. Is Vietnam's oldest enemy. They have been fighting. Vietnamese people have been fighting to keep China out for literally 1,000 years. Wow. There is 1,000 years of different wars. Again, the most recent being 1979 of Vietnam trying to push China out.
At this point, too, though, it's like they were fighting probably one of the most experienced militaries on the planet at this point. The Viet Minh and the Vietnamese had beat the Japanese, they'd beaten the French, they had beaten the Americans, and the Chinese are going to make an attempt at this. Like, you're fighting some of those combat-hardened people on the planet at that point. Like, good luck. And they got there, honestly, the Chinese kind of got their shit pushed in. But on the way out, as they were leaving the country, they blew up and burned and destroyed a bunch of shit, and were like, oh, we won. But in reality, they did not do well at all. Like, they took severe casualties. And this is also the last war that China's actually ever fought.
Really?
They have not fought in any wars since 1979, which is why when people say the modern Chinese military is going to, like, destroy the U.S. military, well, they haven't fought in a war in, like, 50 years.
Well, thanks, guys. Well, that was very interesting. Yeah, that was really... All right, folks. Well, there you go. We saw some sights. We got some history lessons from some of the experts in the field. In the name of my friends, Matt and Adam, and I hope you enjoyed. You know, it was a short 2.5 hour, maybe 3 hour walk throughout the National Mall, but we've seen a lot of landmarks. There's, of course, some that we missed, some that we just don't have the time for. Like, for example, we didn't see the Korean War monument, we didn't see the World War I monument, we didn't see the Jefferson monument, all of which are amazing. And we didn't really get a good look at all at the White House. But that is for the next time. We did all we could. So now it is time for us to pack our bags and head on to the plane and return home. But what a memorable trip it was. It was truly a pleasure and honor to visit this great capital of a one-of-a-kind nation. So thanks for joining me, guys. I'll see you in the next episodes. Cheers.